The glass front of the dealership threw the morning back at itself, all chrome and clean light, and inside it a man in a pressed gray suit was laughing at something that could not laugh back. The thing he laughed at was a motorcycle. Old, scarred, honest. It sat in the customer lot like a tired horse among show ponies, its tank dulled by 1,000 sunrises, its leather seat worn to the shape of one man's body. The suited man circled it with his phone, raised, narrating for an audience that was not there yet, and the word he kept using was relic. He did not know whose bike it was. He would learn. He would learn in a way that rearranged the inside of him for good. His name was Dennis Pruitt, and he was the new general manager of Halloran Premier Motors. 3 weeks into a job he believed he had earned, and had instead been handed. He was 41, lean in the way of men who pay for it, with a haircut that cost more than the boots of the man he was about to insult. He had a way of standing that took up more room than his body did. The lot around him gleamed. The sprinklers had run at dawn, and the asphalt still held dark patches of damp that the desert sun was already pulling back into the sky. Rows of Latimo trucks and crossovers sat with their windshields soaped into prices, little paper flags snapping on a wire strung between the light poles. Behind the plate glass, 2 younger salesmen watched him through the window and grinned the grin of people who have learned that laughing along is safer than not. One of them was barely out of his teens. A kid named Tyler, with a tie he did not know how to knot, and he laughed. Loudest of all, the way the youngest in any room laughs hardest at the boss's joke, and he would carry the shame of that laugh longer than any of them. The owner of the old ride was inside the service bay, on his back beneath a customer's truck, and he had not heard a word. Pull back. 3 days earlier, before any of this, the town of Cargill Flats was the kind of place the interstate had decided to skip. It sat in the high desert, 2 hours east of anywhere. A grid of low buildings baked the color of weak coffee, ringed by scrubland, and the rusting bones of an economy that had moved on. There was one good road through it and a dozen bad ones. There was a feed store, a church, a diner that opened at 5, and there was Halloran Premier Motors, which had been Halloran's garage for 40 years before the word Premier got bolted onto the sign. The man under the truck was named Walt Bowers. He was 63 years old. He had hands that looked like they had been carved out of root wood, knuckles swollen from cold mornings and hot manifolds, a steel-gray beard cropped close, and pale blue eyes set deep under a heavy brow. He wore the same thing every day, a navy-work shirt with his name stitched over the pocket and dark jeans gone soft with washing. He had worked in that building since he was 19. He had bought it from Old Man Halloran in 1988. With money he had saved one careful dollar at a time, and he had kept the name out of respect for a dead man. Then the bank took it slowly. And then all at once, and a holding company bought the paper, and they kept Walt on because Walt could fix anything with wheels and because firing him would have cost them their last good mechanic. The old motorcycle in the lot was his. He had built it from a wreck the year his wife died. Every bolt on it had passed through his fingers. The tank had been painted 4 times, and under the current dull blue were 3 other colors and the fingerprints of a younger man. He rode it to work every day 11 miles in from the place he rented. Now and he parked it where he had always parked it, in the corner of the lot by the propane cage, out of the way. What Walt had not told anyone in Cargill Flats, because there had been no reason to, was the rest of it, the part of his life that did not fit under a customer's truck. The morning Dennis Pruitt decided to make content out of an old man's motorcycle Walt rolled out from under the truck on his creeper, wiped his hands, and saw the suited man through the open bay door. He saw the phone. He saw the circling. He did not move for a moment. Then he stood slow, his knees announcing every year, and he walked out into the light. Pruitt heard the bay door and turned, and his face did the thing that powerful men's faces do when they are caught and decide not to care. He smiled wider. "There he is," Pruitt said to the phone, "the owner of this museum piece." He gestured at the bike like a game show host. "Walt, my man, tell the people, when did they stop making these?" "Stone Age." The two salesmen behind the glass laughed because the boss laughed. "Toe." Walt looked at the phone, then at the man holding it. "You need something fixed, Mr. Pruitt? I need this lot to look like a premium experience," Pruitt said, the smile flattening. "And that thing, parked out front where customers can see it, that's not premium. That's a yard sale. I want it gone by end of day. Put it behind the building or take it home. I don't care. We sell aspiration here, Walt. Nobody's aspiring to that." Walt was quiet. Around them, the desert wind moved a plastic bag across the asphalt. "It's been parked there 19 years, Walt said. "Halloran let me. The company that bought us, they let me. The company that bought us hired me to fix what they let slide." Pruitt slid his phone into his jacket. "End of day. And smile a little, would you? You look like the bike." He turned and walked back toward the glass, and the two salesmen scattered from the window. Walt stood in the lot a while longer. He did not look angry. That was the thing the salesman would remember later, when it mattered. He looked, if anything, tired in a specific and ancient way, like a man hearing a song he had hoped never to hear again. He moved the bike, not because he was told to, because there was a customer's truck up on the lift with the wheels off, and a brake job that had to be done before 3, and because Walt Bowers had spent his whole life finishing what he started. He wheeled the old ride around the back, past the propane cage, and set it in the shade. He ran a thumb along the tank, over the dull blue, the way a man touches the shoulder of an old dog. Then he went back to work. That should have been the end of it. A small cruelty in a small town, the kind that happens 1,000 times a day and leaves no mark. Dennis Pruitt, though, had posted the video, and the internet, which forgets nothing and forgives even less, had begun to do what it does. The video was 22 seconds long. In it, a smug man in a suit circled an old motorcycle and called it a relic, and a museum piece and a yard sale, and in the background, half out of frame, an old man in a Navy work shirt stood and took it. Pruitt had captioned it, "Premium Experience, Upgrade in Progress," and tagged the dealership. He thought it made him look decisive. He thought wrong. By that evening, the video had 11,000 views. By midnight, it had 90,000. The comments were not kind to Dennis Pruitt. Buried in the avalanche of strangers calling him a name his mother would not have liked, though there was one comment, posted at 12:40 in the morning, that had no words at all. It was 3 symbols, a wrench, a skull, and a small blue diamond. To anyone scrolling past, it meant nothing. To the 740 people who understood it, it meant the temperature in a certain corner of the world had just dropped. 2 states away, in a long, low building at the edge of a different desert town, a phone lit up on a scarred bar table, and a very large man with a gray braid down his back picked it up, watched the 22 seconds twice, and set the phone down very gently. He did not say anything for almost a full minute. The men around him went quiet. because they had learned to read his silences the way sailors read a sky. "That's Cutter's, old man," the large man finally said. Nobody spoke. "Somebody find me where Cargo Flats is." To understand why a phone lit up 2 states away over a 22-second video, you have to understand the part of Walt Bowers's life that did not fit under a customer's truck. You have to go back 40 years to a younger man with the same pale blue eyes and a great deal more hair, who rode with an outfit called the Iron Verdict, and who was known in those days by a road name that the old-timers still spoke with their hats off. They had called him Cutter because there was no machine made by man that he could not take apart and put back together better than new, and because once on a bad night on a worse road he had cut a brother free of a wreck with nothing but a pocket knife and his bare hands and 40 minutes of refusing to quit. Walt had ridden with the Iron Verdict for 19 years. He had been their road captain and then their vice president, and he had built or rebuilt half the bikes that still rolled under that patch. His wife was named Carl. She had married him in a courthouse the spring he turned 26, in a dress the color of butter, and she had stood at the edge of 100 club lots over the years, with a thermos of coffee and a paperback, never once asking him to be a smaller man than he was. He had loved her with the whole, uncomplicated force of a simple heart. And then she got sick. The slow kind of sick. The kind that takes a person away one small piece at a time over 3 years. And a man cannot ride 1,000 miles a season and sit by a bed at the same time. He had tried for a while. He had come home from runs to find her thinner, and the math of it had broken something in him, so Walt had done the hardest thing a man like him can do. He had asked to be let go in good standing. He had laid his patch on the scarred table in front of the whole chapter on a Tuesday night he would never forget, and he had not been able to make the speech he had planned. He had just stood there with his hands flat on the wood. And a club which does not, as a rule, let men simply walk away, which had buried members rather than release them, had looked at 19 years of him and made an exception that had no precedent and has had none since. The president before Boone, an old terror named Hatchet, who is in the ground now, had stood up and picked the patch back up off the table and pressed it into Walt's hands and folded his fingers over it and said only that a man keeps what he earns even when he sets it down. They let him go clean. They told him he would always be one of theirs. And then the world got busy, and Carol died on a morning in October with her hand in his, and Walt buried her under a cottonwood she had liked, and he buried himself in other men's engines in a town the interstate had skipped. The years went by. He stopped getting calls because he stopped answering them, not from any hardness, but because every voice from that world carried her in it somewhere, and it was easier for a while, and then the while became a decade. Almost everyone forgot that the quiet old mechanic in Cargo Flats had once been a legend who could fix anything, including, on occasion, a problem that did not run on gasoline. Almost everyone, not though the man with the gray braid whose road name was Boone, and who had been a 19-year-old prospect the night Cutter cut him out of that wreck on that bad road, and who had worn the president's patch of the Iron Verdict for the last 11 years, and who owed the old man under the truck a debt that had a number on it. The number was his life. The morning after the video, Walt got to work at 6, the way he always did. He noticed nothing different. He could not have known that at a truck stop 40 miles west. A column of motorcycles had pulled off the interstate to fuel up, and that the man pumping gas for them had counted them twice and called his cousin to say he had never seen so many in one place. Inside the dealership, Dennis Pruitt was having the best morning of his career and did not yet understand it was the last good one. The video had brought the dealership more attention in 12 hours than it had received in 12 years. The phone was ringing. Pruitt was taking credit. He had already drafted an email to the holding company about engagement metrics and brand visibility, words he loved the way some men love whiskey. He stood at the glass with a coffee and watched the empty corner of the lot where the old motorcycle used to sit, and he felt, briefly, like a man who had won something. At 10:15, the sound arrived before the site. It came in low, under the hum of the desert wind, a deep and braided thunder that did not rise and fall like traffic, but held steady and grew, the sound of many engines moving as one. The salesman heard it first. They drifted to the windows. A customer in the showroom set down a brochure. The sound grew until it was not a sound anymore, but a pressure, something you felt in the floor and the teeth, and then they came around the bend in the road and into view. The entire showroom went silent the way a room goes silent when something larger than the room enters it. They came in formation. 2 by 2, headlights burning in the bright morning, a long, disciplined column that filled the road and kept coming after you thought it had to end. Chrome through the sun in hard white bars. Leather and denim and the dull gleam of patches. They were not speeding. That was the thing that turned the salesmen's stomachs to water. They were moving slow, deliberate, the way a thing moves, when it is in no hurry because it knows it owns the time. The column turned into the dealership lot and split and flowed around the gleaming rows of premium aspiration like water around stones, and they shut their engines down, all of them, in a ragged wave. And then there was a silence, so total that the ticking of cooling metals sounded like rain. 41 motorcycles. Pruitt counted them later on the security footage, over and over, as if the number might change. He would replay those few minutes long after he had left Cargill Flats, in a smaller apartment, in a city that did not know him, trying to find the moment he could have done something different. And he would never find it, because the moment had been 3 weeks earlier, the morning he raised a phone and decided a tired old man was content for strangers. Quote, came out of the service bay wiping his hands, drawn by the silence more than the noise. He stopped in the open doorway, and for the first time in 11 years, something moved across his weathered face that the salesmen could not name, because they had never been loved like that and did not recognize it when they saw it land on someone else. The man with the gray braid swung off the lead bike. He was enormous, well over 6 feet barrel-chested, with a beard gone iron gray and forearms like bridge cable, and across the back of his black leather cut were the words, Iron Verdict, and a stitched death's head with a wrench crossed behind it. He stood for a moment, looking at the old man in the doorway. Then he walked across the lot, and the column watched him go, and he stopped 3 feet from Walt and did not say a word. He reached out one enormous hand and laid it flat against the side of Walt's face, the way you would cup the face of your own father. And Walt closed his eyes, and the two men stood like that in the silence, while 40 men watched, and not one of them looked away. Hello, Cutter, Boone said. His voice was a low gravel rumble that carried across the whole lot. You didn't have to come, Walt said. Yeah, Boone said, we did. Inside the glass, Dennis Pruitt had gone the color of the concrete. He did not understand what he was looking at, but the animal part of him, the part older than the suit, understood it perfectly. The salesman had backed away from the windows. The customer in the showroom had remembered an appointment. Pruitt stood alone behind the plate glass that he had thought made him safe, watching an old man he had mocked on the internet get cradled like something precious by the largest and most frightening person Pruitt had ever seen, while 40 more of them waited in the lot with the patience of weather. Boone turned his head and looked through the glass directly at Pruitt. He did not glare. He simply looked, the way a man looks at a stain he intends to clean. Then he turned back to Walt. "Show me the bike," he said. Walt led him around the back, past the propane cage, into the shade where the old ride sat. Boone crouched in front of it, and his huge fingers moved over the dull blue tank, the worn seat, the engine Walt had built by hand, and he was quiet for a long time. The rest of the column did not follow. They stayed in a lot, a wall of leather and stillness, and they waited. Two of them, a lean, watchful man with a single scar through his eyebrow, and a younger one with quick eyes and a laptop bag slung across his chest, drifted toward the showroom glass and stood there, not going in, just standing, until the salesman inside felt the standing like a hand on the back of the neck. Behind the building, Boone stood up from the bike. "You painted it." "Again twice," Walt said. "What color's it under there now?" "Same as it ever was," Walt said. "All of them. They're all still under there." Boone nodded slowly. He looked at the old man for a long moment. "The man in the suit," he said. "Tell me about him." Walt told him. He told him plainly, without heat, the way he told everything. The new general manager, the relic, the museum piece, the yard sale. End of day, move it or lose it. "Smile a little, you look like the bike." Walt did not editorialize. He did not have to. The facts sat in the desert air and did their own work. When he finished, Boone was quiet again. Then he said the thing that the salesman, who could not hear it, would have given a year's pay to hear. "Here's what's not going to happen," Boone said. "Nobody's going to touch him. Not a finger. That's not what we are, and that's not what you'd want, and it's not what this is." He looked at Walt. "You taught me that. On a road I don't remember the name of. You remember it." "I remember it," Walt said. "So here's what is going to happen," Boone said, and he began in his low gravel rumble to lay it out. What happened over the next 6 hours did not involve a single raised hand. It is important to understand that, because the men of the Iron Verdict understood it better than anyone. Walt had taught them a generation back the thing that separated their kind of justice from the kind that just breaks bones and solves nothing. "You do not punish a man by hurting his body," Walt used to say. "You punish him by showing him, and everyone he wants, to impress exactly what he is. The body heals. The other thing does not." The young one with the laptop bag was called Pixel, and he was the chapter's tactician, and he had the kind of mind that had made the Iron Verdict, in its later and wiser years, far more dangerous than it had ever been with chains and bats. He was 28, narrow-shouldered, with quick dark eyes and ink crawling up both forearms, and he had come to the club out of a life that had nearly swallowed him, and Walt, though he did not know it, was part of the reason the club had a use for a mind like his at all. It was Walt who had told them, years before any of them could spell the word, that the future of any fight was information. Pixel sat down on the curb in the shade with his laptop open on his knees, and he began, quietly, methodically, to learn everything there was to know about Dennis Pruitt and Halloran Premier Motors. He was not breaking any law. He did not have to. Dennis Pruitt had spent years building a public record of himself, and Pixel simply read it. He worked the way Walt had taught the whole club to work, though he had never met Walt before that morning. He started wide and narrowed in: business filings, state licensing, the dealership's own website with its archive of certified pre-owned listings going back years, each one with a photograph and a mileage and a vehicle identification number printed right there for anyone to copy. Public inspection records, which in this state were a matter of law and a matter of search if you knew where to look, and Pixel knew. He laid the two columns side by side on his screen, the mileage the dealership advertised and the mileage the state had recorded, and he ran his eye down them. And after 20 minutes, he stopped and went, very still. "Boone," he said quietly, not looking up, "come look at this." It did not take long to find the first thread. Pixel pulled it. Inside the dealership, the phone had started ringing again, but the calls had changed. The first one Pruitt took was from a woman who said she had bought a certified, pre-owned sedan from Halloran Premier 4 months ago and had just seen something online and wanted to know if it was true that they rolled back odometers because her car had thrown a code that did not match its supposed mileage. Pruitt told her there must be a mistake and hung up. The second call was a man asking the same thing. The third was a local reporter. Pruitt did not yet understand. Out in the lot, though, on the curb, Pixel had found the dealership's service records, which were not as private as they should have been, and had found the gap between the mileage Halloran Premier reported on certain certified vehicles and the mileage those same vehicles had carried at their last state inspection. It was a small fraud, a quiet one, the kind of thing a holding company does to squeeze a few $100 extra out of each car, and Dennis Pruitt had not invented it. Dennis Pruitt, though, had signed off on it for 3 weeks, his name on the certifications, his signature on the paper, because he had wanted to look like a man who got results. Pixel did not post any of it himself. That was the elegance of the thing. He simply made sure that the people who had a right to know already had the means to find it. An anonymous tip to the state's Consumer Protection Office, with document numbers attached. A quiet word, through 3 removes, to the reporter who had already called. The information was true. It had been there the whole time. All Pixel did was turn on the light. Around noon, a man in a different kind of suit arrived in a plain sedan, walked past the wall of motorcycles without appearing to see them, and went inside and asked for Dennis Pruitt by name and showed him a card from the state. Pruitt's morning ended at that moment, though he would spend the rest of the day pretending it had not. The holding company was the real armor, though, and Boone knew it. He had sat across enough tables from enough men in good suits to know how the machine protected itself. A general manager is a disposable thing. He could be fired and replaced, and the machine would keep turning, and Walt would still be working in a building owned by men who saw him as a line item. So while Pixel turned on lights, Boone made a phone call of his own. The iron verdict, in its later years, had become something its founders would not have recognized, and would on reflection have approved of. It had a charitable foundation. It had lawyers. It had, among its extended family, a member whose nephew sat on the board of the very investment group that owned the holding company that owned Halloran Premier Motors. This is the part the suited men never understand until it is too late. They believe their world and the leather world do not touch. They have never been more wrong about anything. The two worlds touch constantly. The leather world simply chooses almost always not to reach across. That afternoon it reached. Across the call that reached the holding company did not come from a man in a leather cut. It came from a soft-voiced attorney who mentioned in the gentlest possible terms that a video involving one of their dealerships had attracted significant attention, that the attention had surfaced certain questions about odometer certifications, and that it might be in everyone's interest to consider whether the current general manager's brief tenure had been an asset to the brand. The attorney did not threaten anyone. He did not have to. He simply laid the facts on the table, the way Walt laid facts on the table. and let them do their own work. Out in the lot, the afternoon wore on. The men of the Iron Verdict did not riot. They did not shout. They did the most unsettling thing a group of large and capable men can do, which is to wait, patiently and lightly, in plain view. Some of them sat on the curb. Two of them bought sodas from the machine by the service bay and drank them slowly. The lean man with the scarred eyebrow, who was the chapter's sergeant-at-arms and was called Vane, stood near the showroom glass for 3 straight hours with his arms crossed, not saying a word, just present, and the salesmen inside could not stop looking at him and could not bear to look at him, and one of them, the youngest, the kid named Tyler in the badly knotted tie, finally walked out into the lot and over to Walt and said, in a voice that shook, that he was sorry, that he had laughed in the window that morning and he should not have, that his grandfather had ridden and he knew better and he was sorry. Walt looked at the kid for a moment, then he put a rootwood hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Then don't laugh next time." And that was all. And the boy nodded and went back inside, changed in a way he would not understand for years. Dennis Pruitt spent the afternoon making phone calls that did not go the way he wanted. He called the holding company to report the situation, to spin it, to get ahead of it, and found that the holding company already knew, and that the tone on the other end of the line had changed from the warmth of a man being congratulated to the chill of a man being measured. He called the police, which is the thing men like Pruitt always do, because they believe the system belongs to them. 2 deputies came. They got out of their car and looked at 41 motorcycles parked in neat legal rows and 40 men sitting and standing and drinking sodas and breaking no law that anyone could name, and the senior deputy, who was a local and who had had his truck's transmission saved by Walt Bowers 2 winters ago, for the cost of parts alone, walked over to Walt and shook his hand and asked how he was doing, and then walked back to Pruitt and told him that as far as he could see, nobody was doing anything illegal, and that if Pruitt wanted these gentlemen to leave, he could ask them himself. The deputies left. Pruitt watched them go, and understood finally and completely that the thing he had believed his whole life, that the system was a wall between him and people like the ones in his lot, was not a wall at all. It had never been a wall. It had been a courtesy, and the courtesy had just been withdrawn. By 4 o'clock the email arrived. Pruitt read it twice. The holding company thanked him for his brief service and informed him that the organization had decided to move in a different direction, effective immediately, and that he should collect his personal effects and surrender his keys to the senior service technician, who would oversee the location on an interim basis, pending the appointment of a permanent manager. The senior service technician was Walt Bowers. There is a moment in the unmaking of a man who has built himself entirely out of borrowed power, when the borrowing comes due all at once, and Dennis Pruitt had his that afternoon in a glass office alone, with 40 men in the lot who had never once raised a hand to him and would never need to. He sat at the desk that was no longer his and stared at the email, and the inside of him did the thing that the inside of such men does. It collapsed, not into violence, into nothing. The narration, the swagger, the premium experience, the aspiration, all of it had been a costume worn over a frightened and ordinary man, and the costume came off now whether he willed it or not, and what was under it was very small. He came out of the office at 4:30 with a cardboard box. He had to walk across the lot to his car. There was no other way out, and the men of the Iron Verdict, who could have made that walk a torment, did not. They simply watched him. 40 pairs of eyes followed him across the asphalt, silent, unhurried, and that was worse than anything they could have said because it was the exact and total attention he had always craved, And it was being given to him now for the exact and total opposite reason. He reached his car. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped his keys. Nobody helped him pick them up. Nobody stopped him either. It was Boone who spoke when Pruitt had the door open. The big man's voice carried across the whole lot without being raised. "You called it a relic," Boone said. He nodded at the building, the lot, the old man standing now in the service bay doorway with a set of keys in his hand. "That man built half of what you'll ever ride past. He cut me out of a wreck with a pocket knife when I was younger than you, and twice as stupid. He gave up the only family some of us ever had so he could sit by a dying woman's bed and hold her hand. You looked at all that, and you saw a yard sale. Boone let that sit. The desert wind moved across the lot. Drive into the sun, mister. Pruitt, it's the only direction left to you." And Dennis Pruitt drove into the sun, west, into the flat, blinding glare of the late afternoon. His car a small dark shape swallowed by light, and he did not come back to Cargill Flats, and within a month the odometer matter had cost him a great deal more than a job. Behind him, in the lot that was no longer premium and had never stopped being Walt's, the engines did not start up again right away. The men were in no hurry. The desert went gold. Then amber. Somebody produced a cooler. Vane, the scarred sergeant at arms, who had stood like a statue for 3 hours, walked over to the old motorcycle behind the building, wheeled it back around to its old spot in the corner by the propane cage, where it had sat for 19 years, and set the kickstand down and stepped back and looked at it, and for the first time all day, something that was almost a smile touched the hard line of his mouth. Walt came and stood beside him. The two of them looked at the old ride in the gold light. "You really keeping this place?" Vane said. It was not quite a question. "Looks like," Walt said. "You gonna fix cars?" "I'm gonna fix cars." Vane nodded slowly. "Boone's not gonna let you do it alone, you know. He's already talking about a charter run through here every season. Says the town's got a good road and a good man, and that's 2 more than most places." Walt didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He reached out and ran his thumb along the dull blue tank over all the colors hidden underneath, the way a man touches the shoulder of an old dog, and the gesture said everything that the words would have ruined. That evening, after the men had eaten and the light had gone purple over the scrubland, Boone found Walt out behind the building, sitting on an overturned crate beside the old bike, with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. The big man lowered himself down onto a second crate with the care of a body that had logged 1,000,000 hard miles, and for a while neither of them spoke. The first stars came out over the desert, hard and clean. "You could come back," Boone said finally. "You know that. The table's got an empty seat at the head of it some nights. Men would follow you tomorrow." Walt smiled into his coffee. "I'm 63 years old, Boone. So's the road. Doesn't stop being the road." Walt was quiet a moment. "I gave it up clean," he said. "You all let me. That was the gift. You don't give a man a gift like that and then take it back, and I'm not going to ask you to, but you can run your charter through here every season. You can park 40 bikes in that lot, and let this town remember what they look like. And when one of you breaks down between here and anywhere, you send him to me, and I'll fix him for parts, and he can sleep in the bay." He turned to the cold coffee in his hands. "That's a seat at the table. It's just my table." Boone looked at the old man for a long time in the starlight. Then he nodded, slow and deep, the nod of a president accepting terms, and he stood and put his enormous hand once more against the side of Walt's face. And Walt closed his eyes again, and that was the whole conversation. They rode out at dawn. Walt stood in a lot in the gray first light and watched them go, two by two, the long, disciplined column flowing back out onto the good road through Cargill Flats and turning east, into the rising sun this time, their engines braiding into one sound again, and then thinning into the distance until the desert took the last of it. Then the silence came back, the ordinary silence of an ordinary morning. And a meadowlark started up somewhere out in the scrub, and the sun cleared the low hills and laid itself across the lot. Walt went inside. He flipped the sign in the door from CLOSED to Opian, the way he had 1,000 times, except that now the keys in his pocket were his own. There was a customer's truck still up on the lift with a brake job that had to be finished. He pulled the bay door open. He pulled on his gloves. And before he rolled himself under the truck, he stopped in the doorway and looked back once at the old motorcycle parked in its corner by the propane cage, dull blue tank catching the new sun, all its hidden colors safe underneath, exactly where it had always been. He smiled, not because anyone told him to. Then he went to work. If this story warmed something in you, if it reminded you that the people the world overlooks are so often the ones who build everything worth keeping, take a moment to sit with that feeling and pass it on to someone who needs it today. Thank you for listening.